Hello everyone, and welcome to Lancelot's Nerd Corner, where I'm proud to present another 6-scale figure review. Today, we'll be taking a look at Aragorn, standard version, by InArt, and I'm really glad to be giving you my honest and detailed account of the figure. Starting with the head sculpt, which overall is really well done, except for one thing that just throws it off for me a little. But starting with the good, InArt skin texturing continues to be unmatched in my eyes. The combination of the paint app and sculpt work provide an insanely realistic skin texture. And facial features like the nose, lips, and brow all look accurately proportioned. I do think the jaw should have been a little bit narrower, but it doesn't detract from the likeness too much. And you can see a hint of Viggo's cleft chin underneath the beard. Speaking of which, the beard is incredibly finely detailed, to the point where you can see individual hairs, and InArt really captured that scruffy ranger look. The only thing they could have added to make it even more accurate was to have some areas of the beard darker than the rest, like Viggo's was in the film. My only exception to the whole head sculpt is the expression. The way the brow is sculpted low and furrowed makes him look a bit worried, and from some angles even fearful, which to me not only does it throw off the likeness a bit, it's also just not very fitting for the heir of Isildur. And I think a more stoic or determined expression would have been preferable. The sculpted hair looks better than ever from InArt. It's more finely detailed and thinner than the Joker's sculpted hair was, and in my opinion, it's the most realistic sculpted hair they've done so far. I especially really love the strands that fall in front of his face. It's a very nice and accurate touch. My only issue with the hair is that I think there's too much of it. Same thing as with the Joker actually. Especially towards the bottom, I think there's way too much, because if you look at screen grabs from the film, you can clearly tell his hair is super thin, especially at the bottom. And it creates a second issue because the hair sculpt is very stiff and quite sharp, so tilting the head is very difficult, and even if I tried, I'm afraid the hair tips will pierce the fabric of the outfit. Lastly, the head sculpt does feature separate rolling eyeballs, and in order to access them, simply pull the head sculpt off the slip peg and use the little joysticks to move the eyes with your finger. The different eye positions can definitely help enhance the likeness and really mitigate that worried expression. Now let's take a look at the figure itself, starting with the body, which feels like the standard weight for InArt bodies based on previous figures. There's a great range of motion throughout in general, but similarly to the InArt Joker, the torso joints feel quite flimsy, which makes it a bit tricky to pose other joints when the torso keeps moving out of place. And just like with my InArt Joker and InArt Batman figure, it feels like this one will lean forward or backward due to the weak ankles. Now let's move on to the figure's costume, starting with the beautiful long overcoat that Aragorn wears pretty much throughout the entire movie. It's made of a soft, lightweight fabric that has a slightly rough feel to it, and while I think the color is mostly correct, I think the coat should have had a much smoother texture and appearance. There are accurate details like the large stitching seams around the shoulder and waist area, and it's tailored really well, as it sits nice and close to the body without hindering articulation. Lastly, the bottom half is separated into 4 panels, just like in the movie, and it's for practical reasons as well, for the scabbards to fit in between the gaps. The brown vest is made of a very thin, almost paper-like fabric with a suede-like texture. I think it should have been a much darker brown, but it does have nice weathering details throughout, like the patches of dirt and grime. There are details of strings going down the shirt and large stitching seams, and once again has superb tailoring. The bottom of the shirt is cut up and ripped, and while it's not exactly screen accurate, it still is a nice touch. The vambraces come in 2 parts. There's the larger padding underneath with the diamond pattern, then the smaller padding on top with the white tree of Gondor emblazoned in silver. There's also incredibly intricate carving of feathers on the top half, and the vambrace is secured by 2 buckles underneath. I'm not sure if they're made of real or faux leather, but InArt claims to use real materials where they can, so I'll take them at their word. And they are quite tight on the figure, so you won't really have to adjust them closer to the hands. Speaking of which, the figure comes with a total of 7 hands, including a pair of relaxed, weapon holding, bow holding, and an individual pipe holding gesture. The left hands are bare except for a green ring on the index finger, and just like the head sculpt, the skin texturing is amazing. And it's weathered with lots of grime and dirt, just as you would expect a ranger's hands to be. The right hand is covered in a brown fingerless glove, and there are nice details of sculpted wrinkles and different layers of leather patches. And the fingers are just as dirty, grimy, and weathered as those on the left. However, I did have an issue where a lot of the sockets on the hands weren't big enough to peg into the wrist, so I had to either carve it up to make it larger or simply force it to peg in with a lot of effort. This seems like a terribly amateur oversight and a clear quality control issue for InArt. And if that wasn't bad enough, the index finger on my bow holding hand popped off when I was trying to fit the bow in, and it's becoming clearer to me with every new release that InArt really needs to get a grip on their QC process, because I think this is simply unacceptable at the prices they charge. The belt is made of the same material as the vambraces, but thinner, and it's quite long as it's meant to wrap around itself and then hang down. And just like with the InArt Batman, you have to put the belt and belt accessories on yourself. And while I do take exception to having to assemble the figure myself, I also understand it's meant to keep the smaller, more fragile accessories and soft goods from being damaged in the box. The pants and boots are both made of the same material, and it feels like a mix between the coat and the vest. It has the thickness and softness of the coat, but the texture of the vest, and this is the texture that I think the coat should have had. The pants are a similar color to the belt, whereas the boots are much lighter brown, and both are tailored really well and appropriately weathered for a ranger's travels. And the boots go all the way up to the knees and have a nice detail of 3 rows of string wrapped around. Lastly, the outfit comes with one last additional piece, which is the elven cloak the Fellowship receives before departing Lothlorien. While I appreciate the addition, I do think InArt missed quite wildly with this one. The cloak is paper thin and flimsy as heck, and I think it's the completely wrong material and texture. In the film, it looks like it's made out of a thick cotton or even wool fabric, whereas InArt went with something more akin to silk. It does negatively affect how well the cloak drapes over the figure, like it just doesn't look right. But they at least got the beautiful elven brooch correct. Now that we've gone over the entire figure, let's take a look at all the accessories the figure comes with. The figure comes with the hands and cloak that we already covered, as well as a display base, sword with scabbard, longbow, 4 arrows, quiver, a short bow, elven knife with scabbard, marching blanket, bundled cloak, a small knife, smoking pipe, whetstone, and the even star necklace. The display base is a rectangular base made of resin, and it's meant to resemble the ruins from the climax of the film where Aragorn first faces the Uruk-hai. The surface is sculpted to look like large stone slabs, with huge cracks and tiny bumps helping to sell the realism. And it's weathered and painted really well all throughout. There's amazing details of tufts of grass along the edges and in between the cracks, and it adds so much more character. The base is lined on every side with the beautifully sculpted arches, and in front is the name of the figure in the iconic Lord of the Rings typeface. Lastly, the base has 2 movable magnets that can correspond with the figure's feet in different poses, and this is accessed through the bottom of the base. The sword's scabbard is dark green and has a very leathery grain texture all throughout, with silver accents here and there, and it has an additional scabbard on the side for the small knife. The sword itself is of beautiful workmanship, polished and painted nicely with a well-defined fuller, and judging from the weight and heft, I believe it is made of die-cast. The crossguard, handle, and pommel are all well sculpted, and the scabbard has long leather straps because it's meant to be strapped to the belt. The longbow is meant to look like it's stowed away for long travel, which is why it has the bowstring coiled around it. It has great paint app, especially showing the wood grain of the bow, and has a slightly polished finish. It is meant to be stored on the quiver by slipping it through the leather loop, but it's a super tight fit, so be careful. The 4 arrows are nicely constructed with small but important details, like the sculpted fletching. I also like how the arrow tips go from black to white in a gradient, and all 4 can obviously be stored in the quiver. The quiver is made of a thick rubber, and the way it's sculpted to have those straps in an X pattern going through the silver rings is very accurate. There are straps of what I'm assuming is faux leather to sling across the body, and this piece of brown fabric is meant to keep the arrows in place. And while I thought it was just something InArt provided for this figure, it's actually screen accurate, as that same fabric can be seen in the quiver in the film, which showcases InArt's incredible attention to detail. The short bow is the bow you'll probably be using for poses, as it has the bowstring extended and can actually be pulled back for really dynamic poses. The bow itself is painted with a nice wood grain pattern and a slight polish. The elven knife is a beautifully crafted weapon, as is fitting for the elves. The shape of the blade is accurate, as well as the intricately sculpted elvish inscription. And just like the sword, I do believe it's made out of die-cast, and it's meant to be strapped to the belt. However, I think it's slightly inaccurately scaled, as it should have been a tiny bit shorter. The marching blanket is a super soft and smooth fabric that's rolled up and bundled with 3 pieces of string. It's very nicely weathered with stains of dirt and dust all around, and has a strap so it can be slung behind the figure. Similarly, the bundled cloak is a much rougher and lighter fabric that is folded up and tied at the end, and it can also be slung over the figure. The small knife is pretty self-explanatory and quite simple. It's just a small blade with a dark brown handle. The smoking pipe is an accessory that I'm so glad InArt included. It's painted a light brown and the stem extends really long. And there's incredible attention to detail, with the top of the pipe chamber being charred black, and inside is what seems to be burnt bits of whatever good stuff Aragorn smokes on his long travels. The whetstone is a super small accessory that is tucked into a brown pouch, and it can be attached to the belt with a metal clip. Lastly, the even star necklace is one of the tiniest accessories I've ever seen, and I really have to give props to InArt for how well they captured the shape and details of the pendant, knowing how intricate they are. And of course, it can be worn on the figure. Aragorn is InArt's first foray into the Lord of the Rings franchise, and all things considered, I think this is a sign of good things to come for this line. While there are some things to critique and for them to improve, such as slight adjustments to the head sculpt, more accurate material choice, and overall quality control, I still think there's way more great things about this figure, like the tailoring, overall head sculpt, tons of accessories, and so much more. If you're a fan of The Lord of the Rings, especially the first film, I think you'll be so impressed by this figure, you might just end up swearing fealty to this rightful king of Gondor. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this review helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.